link them to what you are proposing in the bill.
John, okay. Kwa kifupi sana manake naarifiwa muda wetu umekwisha. Kwa sekunde chache pengine tumefika hapa kwa sababu tumeambiwa tuna madeni makubwa na serikali. Na hivyo basi lazima tugaramie sisi kwa utozaji ushuru wa zaidi na kadhalika. Lakini nafahamu mimi ni kwamba hakuna serikali ulimwenguni inaweza kujimudu bila madeni kiwango fulani. Itakushangaza kwamba siku za usoni tujikute tuko katika hali hii ngumu ya kulipia ushuru mkubwa zaidi na bado tuna madeni makubwa. Somo litakuwa ni lipi?
Asante. The challenge we have with our public debt, we also have to look at it from the composition of what we borrowed. Because when we became a low middle income country, we quickly took up the opportunities that came with going to the commercial markets where we could borrow debt without too many conditions, but it's more expensive. And that has ramped up over time. And so it's not a problem to borrow. I think, there's always going to be a scenario where sometimes governments need to borrow. But the reason for what we borrow and from who we borrow has a big determinant on then what kind of implications in your debt repayment it will be. Because it's thinking about the interest rate at which you're borrowing. If you look at some of the multilaterals that we borrow from the World Bank, some of the interest rate is as low as 0.75%. If you look at some of the commercial debt that we borrow, some of it is as high as 6%. So that's one side of it. The second side of it is how quickly does that debt mature? Because in terms of government thinking about debt, you have to think of it in the long term so that you're able to spread your repayment. One of the things we didn't do very well is that. So there's a lot of debt that is falling due around the same time, and that puts a lot of pressure on government on then how much can you actually be able to settle. And so the challenge we saw in March of this year was one example of when we don't do that very well. So there's definitely a thinking that has to change within the country on, number one, what do we need to borrow for? Number two, who do we borrow from? And are those terms going to affect us in a negative way in future, or should we